It was a few weeks ago that the hay bales started creeping slowly away from the house. Every morning when I woke up, each had moved a few hundred feet from where it was before. I assumed it was pranksters with nothing better to do, so I ignored it. Within a few days, though, the bales began to approach the boundaries of the farm. I was tired of the whole game by then, and decided to move them back. It took a tedious hour to bring them all from where they were to over near the house again, and by the time I was done I was ready to snap the neck of whatever little pissant was deciding to screw with me. The next morning, I found each and every one of my horses messily decapitated. The smell was what woke me up. Each one was slumped over against the side of its stall. There were no signs of the heads. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the mess and burying the remains. It was only when I was done that I noticed the bales of hay had all returned to their positions from the day before, scattered far out into the fields. This time I left them where they were. That night I sat on my porch with my shotgun in hand and a pot of coffee on the table beside me. I sat for hours, straining my eyes into the fields to catch a glimpse of who was moving my hay bales. Finally, I was beginning to nod off. I would have, but just as my eyes began to close I heard a clamor and a rustling of trees from the nearby woods. I leaned forward, my heart racing with excitement. I was going to catch the bastard. I fumbled with my gun and fidgeted in my seat, waiting anxiously for whoever it was to get close enough to ambush. It was only when the thing got close enough for me to make out its silhouette in the dark that I was frozen still. The thing that crept into my fields from the nearby woods didn't seem to notice me sitting there. It stalked, hunched and deliberate, through the field with the posture of a tiptoeing thief. If not for the fact that it must have towered to over 10 feet tall even in its crouched position, it might have seemed almost frail. The thinness of its arms and legs and the emaciated, caved-in quality of its chest reminded me of a starving animal. Still, this thing was undeniably strong, and I watched it hoist each bale up into its arms with ease, and set it down carefully a while away, taking only a few strides to cover the distance. I watched it work, moving each bale thoughtfully. Every once in a while it would straighten up to look around at the other bales' positions in the field, before adjusting the one it was working on ever so slightly. Before it left, it looked towards the house. I felt its eyes sweep over me in the dark, but whether it saw me or not I couldn't tell. Then, it turned silently and crept back the way it came, disappearing into the dark of the woods. It took me an hour before I had the courage to move at all. I went inside after a while, but didn't sleep that night. It was only when the sun rose that I dared step off my porch into the fields. The hay bales were where it left them. Strangely, it didn't move them as far as it had in the previous days. They were approaching something invisible in the fields, and as I looked at them I realized that they seemed to be marking some line. Indeed, as I walked around the house, I saw the distinct circle that they formed with me at the center. At first I thought the bales were just being haphazardly moved away from the house, but now I could see that they were instead being moved towards some boundary. The thing was sending me a message. I slept uneasily that night, and only because I was exhausted. The next morning the bales hadn't moved at all. They didn't move at all for the rest of that week, in fact. They were finally where the thing wanted them. I made myself sick trying to interpret them. Why would this thing expend so much energy moving my hay bales, and threaten me with such violence should I try to interfere? Killing my horses was just that, a threat. An intelligent threat, at that. It knew what would scare me, and it knew that I would understand the implications. The sound of an automobile working its way along the road to my farm one morning gave me a little rush of excitement. I'd been planning to abandon the farm since I saw the thing, but I couldn't hope to leave on foot without risking it treating me like it treated my horses. But, if I could get in the car with whoever was coming my way, I might be able to escape before it could stop me. I didn't know or care who it was. I decided that the moment they stopped the car, I would jump in the passenger's seat and tell them to get the hell out of here. I didn't get the chance. The car worked its way slowly along the road, trundling across the uneven ground. I urged it silently to hurry. It was when it passed between the two bales placed on either side of the road that I began to hear a booming clatter from the woods. The thing burst suddenly from between the trees, sprinting on all four of its terrible, gangly limbs towards the car. Within a few seconds it was there, pouncing on the automobile like a predatory cat. Within moments it was picking and peeling the vehicle's steel frame apart, working to get at the driver. The man, whoever he was, screamed all the while, and I could hear him even over the crunching of metal and the shattering of glass. It was only when the thing crushed him carelessly in its hand that the screaming stopped. It tossed him away, and straightened up to look at me once again. In the sunlight, I could see the inhumanity of it. It was composed entirely of something awful and alive which was lashed together in a messy semblance of a human form. Whatever it was made of looked so polished and hard, that if it weren't for the minute writhing of the stuff, I'd think it was made of granite. The thing retreated back into the woods, and I was left to my shock. My eyes wandered to where the car sat, the engine still sputtering, between two of the hay bales. Suddenly, I understood. The message was clear. I am this thing's captive, and I am not allowed visitors. Nothing may cross the borders it has set. I'm trapped here, by the thing that stalks the fields, and it demands nothing except that I never leave. Still, I don't know if I can handle being that thing's canary. I've been thinking hard for the last few days since I saw it crush that man's chest, and silence him before he could finish his scream. If I crossed the hay bale border, it'd probably do the same. It'd smash my skull before I could put my hands up to protect myself. It'd go and find a new pet, and probably keep looking until it found someone who could stand knowing that it was waiting just outside, watching it at all hours with its shiny, insect eyes. I've been thinking hard for the last few days, and I might just make a run for it. Posted my story before. Enjoy. Well, me and my best friend went camping out in some woods nearby an abandoned coal miner area, apparently shut down due to health and safety violations ages ago. Arrive at woods around 7 p.m. summer, so still bright. We set up camp. It's late and all that shit. Gets dark, got a fire going. We're just digging around, seeing how good of a shot we are in the dark by targets we set up earlier. So it gets late. Around 1 a.m. friend's asleep, I'm awake. Pondering about my goals in life, friend wakes up, says Hess can go take a piss, so off he goes. 5 minutes. Maybe he's taking a shit. 10 minutes. Must be one long shit. Gets nearer to half hour, point big flashlight in his general direction. See a person in the distance unclearly. Oh, thank fuck it's him. Took his time, the bastard. He waves at me, but his movement is jerky and his eyes look different as he gets closer. Hey dude, you okay? No speech. No, my best friend. Instantly know that isn't him. Whatever it is. For one, he never goes anywhere without his lucky chain that his late grandmother gave to him. I sneeze, eyes shut for a second. He went from 50 meters to 10 meters in front of me. Hey man, you better stay right there. Backing away, grab my gun. He makes this weird cackle sound. Stay the fuck back, I mean it. Runs at me, gun jams. Ah shit. I run through the woods, sprint like a motherfucker. Heart is pounding. Before I know it, I'm in that area nearby that got shut down a year ago. Got a second to fix my gun at least. Unexplainable sound or not. Run to nearby building. Kick the somewhat rotted door in and hide inside upstairs. In the kitchen area, okay fuck, think. At the same time I hear it looking downstairs. Smashing shit. Terrified, but I'm not about to give up. I'm not fucking dying here, I'm 21, damn it. Smell the faint smell of gas. Wait a second, see leaking gas tap. Okay, I think this could work. Sneak across silently, undo tap all the way. Thank fuck I still have my friend's lighter on me. I'm making him quit smoking. Room fucking stinks. Barely breathing from all this gas. It smelt it obviously. Comes upstairs. Grab a metal chair I see and hide behind door. He walks in. Walks forward. Halfway across. Goes to turn around. Smash right into its head and it falls back. Right. This either works or I die. Run to window. It's only a 20 feet drop. I've survived worse. It gets up, momentarily dazed. Jump the window as I lift the lighter up. As I fall out the window, massive explosion land outside, on the floor, on my left side. Scream in pain as I realize I broke my left arm from it breaking the fall, managed to stand. The house is completely on fire. See that thing in there burning and screaming? It separates in half almost. Yeah, that wasn't my friend. Where the fuck is he anyways? I'll find him or I'm not leaving. It falls out the window. Lands, burning still, it goes still and silent. Right, well, safe to say it's dead. I'd go back and get my gun and make sure, but well, I left in that flaming wreck. Wearily walk. Yelling friend's name for about an hour, I'd guess. Near woods. Hear faint response at last. Eyes at him. Follow the voice as I shout his name. It's him. He's tied up with barbed wire to a tree. He's alive. Covered in blood, beaten and bruised. But alive. Go to camp. Get some cutters. Cut him free. He tells me I wouldn't believe what happened, but something tells me you already know. Tell him what happened. Show him where. The corpse is laying there, rotting already. Good, fuck that thing. We go back and pack up. Leave. We go to the nearest hospital, then ring, and when they get to us in hospital everyone asks, what happened? How did we get so beat up? They wouldn't believe us if we told them. To this day we never spoke of it again. I'm fine with talking about it now, but he still has serious PTSD.
Hey, X, I'm gonna tell you all a story that I swore never to speak of ever again, since I never knew exactly what happened and needless to say it was traumatizing. However, I feel the need to tell you guys since all of these Skinwalker stories are coming up and, well, just read the story. Also, I'm going to apologize for any grammatical, spelling errors as I am typing fast. I live in northern Washington near a shit ton of woods, and one day me and 3 of my friends, Aaron, Jake, and Kyle, made plans to go camping, exploring in the woods since we all love the outdoors and wanted to get away from it all for a few days. My friends' names are changed to stay anonymous. My friend Jake knew these woods the best and said he had a great spot for us to go camping, so we all got our stuff and headed to the woods. When we got to the woods it was around 12 p.m. and took us about 2 hours to get to the spot, which was perfect, and to set up our stuff. After we set our stuff up and ate, we decided to go exploring, with Jake leading the way. Everything was going great. We were going a lot farther than I've ever gone in those woods, and eventually we made it to a clearing. That's when Jake started to act different. I didn't really think anything of it at first. I just blew it off as him being weird. As we were walking across the clearing, I saw a greyish human-looking thing walk into the woods on the far side, but again just blew it off since I didn't want to get them riled up for no reason. We were about 3/4 of the way across the clearing when we saw a mutilated deer laying there. When I say mutilated, I mean it was cut clean in half with its head completely missing and parts of its skin ripped clean off. What made every one of us uneasy was the fact that there were no flies around the carcass at all, and it was still warm. I instantly thought back to that thing I saw in the woods and told him about it. Aaron said he saw it too, but he thought that he was just seeing things. I then got the unshakable feeling that I was being watched, and I could see that everyone else was creeped out. So we all decided to go back to the campsite since it was getting late anyways. As we got back to the other side of the clearing, I heard what sounded like someone running up on me really fucking fast, so I turned around and there was nothing there. WTF.avi, I tell my friends that we should hurry the fuck up because I don't want to be out there anymore. They agree and we start jogging through the woods with the sun setting. Now we didn't think we would be in the woods for as long as we were, so no one brought a flashlight and it was getting dark fast. About 20 minutes into our jog back to the camp, we hear a blood-curdling scream come from no less than 50 meters away from us. At this point we are running through the ever-darkening woods hoping that whatever the fuck that is will stay away from us. We then hear weird growls off to the side of us, rustling, and twigs snapping. I'm terrified at this point and we are all sprinting through the woods back to the site. We eventually make it back and tear into the tent, with all of us hyperventilating. None of us say anything for about 5 minutes, when Jake says, "Let's get the fuck out of here." Right after he says that we hear foo cccckkkkk out uofffff hieri right outside the fucking tent. Every one of us is beyond terrified at this point and have no idea what the fuck to do. We sit there in complete silence and we hear 2 sets of footsteps going around our campite, throwing our supplies around. One of the things even tries to open the tent, but I hold the zipper down with all the force I can muster while everyone else is crying from pure fear. Eventually the things leave, but we are too scared to even go near the door. After about 3 hours of trying to figure out what the fuck just happened, Jake decides he's going to check outside to make sure the coast is clear so we can get the fuck out of there. I decide to go with him since I didn't want him to get killed. When he opened the door and we stepped out, he shined the flashlight into the woods and we saw 3 of those things staring right the fuck at us. Their eyes were huge and sunken in, but also pitch black. They were about 6 feet tall and lanky as fuck, but as soon as we saw them they ran faster than I've ever seen anything run back into the forest. Jake and I book it back into the tent and tell Kyle and Aaron what just happened. Aaron becomes hysterical and comes up with the brilliant idea to run back to the car and get out of there. I tried to stop him, but he was running on pure fear and booked it into the woods in the direction of our car. The rest of us decide to go looking for him since those things were probably still out there. As we are grabbing our flashlights, we hear him scream in the distance, followed by a loud fucking growl. We run out of the tent and begin screaming for him, and spend the next 20 minutes looking for him. Kyle begs us to go back to the campsite since we kept hearing something walking in the woods really fucking close to us. When we get back to the campsite, Aaron is standing with his back to us facing the tent. Jake starts crying and says, What the actual fuck were you thinking, you stupid fuck? Aaron then, almost robotically, turns to us and says, haha, don't worry about it guys, I'm fine. We all look at each other but then decide to get back into the tent for safety. Jake says that it's best for us to just wait out the night, and then leave in the morning. I then notice bruises and cuts all on Aaron's arms and legs, and when I asked him about it he said, haha, don't worry about it guys, I'm fine, he said it the same exact fucking way. We all try to just ignore him and get through the night alive. The rest of the night we heard those things walking around our campsite, and Aaron kept asking if we wanted to go back out there for stupid fucking reasons. Like, hey Anon, I saw this sweet rock back there in the woods. You wanna go see it? After a fucking eternity, morning came and the noises stopped. We all began sprinting to the car. When about 20 minutes in I noticed Aaron wasn't anywhere to be seen. Since my other friends were still running and I didn't want to fall behind, I kept moving. We finally made it back to the car and we all agreed that Aaron was probably gone. We sped the fuck home and swore to never talk about this to anyone ever again. We told Aaron's mom that he walked off in the middle of the night and we couldn't find him. I don't know what came of the search, but I assume they probably didn't find him. I wish that we never would have gone camping that day, for Aaron's sake. Eventually the things leave, but we are too scared to even go near the door. After about 3 hours of trying to figure out what the fuck just happened, Jake decides he's going to check outside to make sure the coast is clear so we can get the fuck out of there. I decide to go with him since I didn't want him to get killed. When he opened the door and we stepped out, he shined the flashlight into the woods and we saw 3 of those things staring right the fuck at us. Their eyes were huge and sunken in, but also pitch black. They were about 6 feet tall and lanky as fuck, but as soon as we saw them they ran faster than I've ever seen anything run back into the forest. Jake and I book it back into the tent and tell Kyle and Aaron what just happened. Aaron becomes hysterical and comes up with the brilliant idea to run back to the car and get out of there. I tried to stop him but he was running on pure fear and booked it into the woods in the direction of our car. The rest of us decide to go looking for him since those things were probably still out there. As we are grabbing our flashlights we hear him scream in the distance, followed by a loud fucking growl. We run out of the tent and begin screaming for him, and spend the next 20 minutes looking for him. Kyle begs us to go back to the campsite since we kept hearing something walking in the woods really fucking close to us. When we get back to the campsite, Aaron is standing with his back to us facing the tent. Jake starts crying and says, what the actual fuck were you thinking, you stupid fuck? Aaron then, almost robotically, turns to us and says, haha, don't worry about it guys, I'm fine. We all look at each other but then decide to get back into the tent for safety. Jake says that it's best for us to just wait out the night, and then leave in the morning. I then notice bruises and cuts all on Aaron's arms and legs, and when I asked him about it he said, haha, don't worry about it guys, I'm fine, he said it the same exact fucking way. We all try to just ignore him and get through the night alive. The rest of the night we heard those things walking around our campsite, and Aaron kept asking if we wanted to go back out there for stupid fucking reasons. Like, hey Anon, I saw this sweet rock back there in the woods. You wanna go see it? After a fucking eternity, morning came and the noises stopped. We all began sprinting to the car. When about 20 minutes in I noticed Aaron wasn't anywhere to be seen. Since my other friends were still running and I didn't want to fall behind, I kept moving. We finally made it back to the car and we all agreed that Aaron was probably gone. We sped the fuck home and swore to never talk about this to anyone ever again. We told Aaron's mom that he walked off in the middle of the night and we couldn't find him. I don't know what came of the search, but I assume they probably didn't find him. I wish that we never would have gone camping that day, for Aaron's sake.
B7. Dad drops me off at grandparents' house after school. He's in a hurry to get back to work or some shit and has a spare key, so he opens the door and shoves me in and just yells, I'm leaving Anon here. I'll pick him up after work. Assuming grandparents were home. They weren't. At first I have a blast, playing with my toys and eating cookies like a boss. After a few hours I remember a sensation of sheer terror coming over me out of nowhere. Decide to go upstairs to grandparents' room and wait for someone to get home. They had thick dumbwaiter, old ass house, without the thing to pull shit up and down, so it was basically a shaft that lead from the attic to the basement, 4 stories in all. Something compelled me to open it and look down. At the bottom, standing there in the basement, was a woman pale as snow in a white dress and with white hair, but she had pitch black eyes. She was motioning me with her arms to jump down. Then in my head I started hearing jump anon, jump jump jump. No op-ed back to my grandparents' room and hid under the covers until my grandmother came home. Of course she didn't believe me and said I was probably just scared of being home alone. That would have been a 3-story drop onto the concrete basement floor. I would have surely died. Another of my ghost stories, same house. Be 14 or so. Living in grandparents' attic because mom and dad going through messy divorce. Listening to music on my walking man. All of a sudden hear through headphones, join me anon, faint and starts getting louder. Keeps saying join me. Feel something heavy as shit sit on my chest. Can't see anything, just keep hearing through the headphones join me anon. Woman's voice sounded like she was in her 20s to 30s. Try and reach to take off my headphones but I'm paralyzed as fuck from the neck down. Pressure on my chest getting worse, having trouble breathing. In front of my bed was a window. I see the same pale bitch from before outside the fucking window motioning me to come to her. Noopy. Don't know what to do, close my eyes and start to pray. After only a minute or so of praying the pressure stops and I can move again. Open eyes and no one is at the window. Rip the headphones off, AD chuck Walkman into the garbage with the tape and all. Fuck Matchbox 20. Never again. Got the Walkman out of the bin the next day.
Oh boy, I got a bunch of these. Here's one, it's gonna be long. B10. Family lived together in a big ass compound. Great-grandmother and granduncle and his 4th wife and a bunch of affiliates we never really knew lived in the big ass main house. Grandfather and grandmothers lived in the secondary house, attached to the main house. Me and my family, dad, mom, sister, lived a smaller house in the back. Behind our house was the house of a groundskeeper and his family. The house to our side and in the far corner of the grounds belonged to the gardener, spellcheck, who was kinda batshit crazy. Anyway, my house's small garden was directly across the back garage of the main house, and that was directly behind the library of the main house. So from my house you could look across the garden and garage into the library's windows. The shutters were always closed because my granduncle did his lawyer stuff there and we never gave a damn. This isn't important to the story right now, but will be in a second. My great-grandmother was almost 105 and needless to say, she was fragile as a stick and on the verge of death. My granduncle loved his women but he never heard the phrase, never stick your dick in crazy, and his 4th wife was this creepy woman who supposedly was into black magic and shit. Nobody gave a fuck except my grandfather, who liked reading a lot about witches and magic and shit. He had a Lovecraft hobby. Anyway, he didn't liked her. When my great-grandmother died, people decided to abandon the main house, the big ass one. In less than a week everyone was gone and the house was left the way it was, furniture and everything. So my mom and grandma took it to themselves to clear the house out and pawn everything. First week of clearing everything up, they come up with this written manuscript that was supposedly kept by my late great-grandma. It was a journal, kind of, and it talked about how she hated my great-uncle's wife and how she was terrified of her. How she suspected she was planning her death so she could have my uncle's money and shit. It also mentioned a black-robed monk figure that used to stalk her in her childhood/teenagehood and that was apparently back now. This monk would sit by her side at night and stare at her. She said he had a mean, serious face, always scowling, was bald and his skin was pale, almost gray. She wouldn't sleep because she was afraid the monk would kill her. She was sure the wife had conjured up the monk. We all thought it was the ramblings of an old woman and laughed about it. Then shit got weird. One day my dad was helping my mom clean up the library and sort the books, thousands of books about law and shit, worth a fortune, and she left him to go to the bathroom. He said that a few minutes later he turned around and there was a fucking monk standing there and he punched him square in the face then ran away. The next day his face was swollen as if a horse had kicked him in the jaw. Another time, my mom was going through my late great-granny's crap, when she opened a drawer and immediately someone put a hand on the drawer out of the corner of her eye and closed it shut. She turned but there was anyone else. Our dog would stand in our garden for hours barking wildly at the library window. He would literally go crazy, growl, and go into a defensive stance as if he was standing face to face with another animal. He would only stop if we pulled him inside, and even so he would stand still looking nervous in the direction of the garden/library. The gardener would often hear someone walking out his house. He would lock himself up and yell to whoever was out there to get out, but then the noises would stop. The groundskeeper would go out at night to check on the dogs and houses. People were always breaking in the grounds back then, and often he would see a tall white silhouette appear then vanish a few feet in front of him. There was also an empty pool in the grounds, whom he swore reeked of putrefaction during the night but would be perfectly fine during the day. Oftentimes while passing through a window of the big house he would say he always felt something looking at him. But I never cared about any of those until they fucking sold the blinds of the library. You see, from my room's window, you could see our garden, and hence, the fucking library windows. At the time the Xbox 360 had just came out and I was up all night playing Gears of War or Splinter Cell and crap. I'd leave my window open because that fucking Xbox would heat up my entire room. It wasn't a concern to leave them open because our windows had a thin metal grate on the outside that covered them up. One night I'm all up and concentrated playing Splinter Cell, when I hear someone fucking breathing in my fucking window. I turn around and I see a fucking pale gray face, staring right at me and smiling. Yellow eyes, yellow teeth. It looked like as if fucking Palpatine, pick related, was standing there peeking through my windows looking at me. I literally lost my shit and literally jumped against the fucking wall. It was gone as soon as I got ready to throw the fucking controller at it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night and I didn't told my dad about it until morning because I was also afraid to get out of the room. One afternoon I was sitting in my room doing stuff I can't remember, fapping, or something alike, when I felt the uncontrollable urge to look through my window, across the garden to the library. I stared at those black windows for what appeared to be half an hour. I couldn't stop looking. I was terrified because something kept me looking at those windows. Then I felt it. The same feeling you get that something or someone is staring back. It was huge. I couldn't see anything but I knew it was there. It was looking at me whatever it was. I was fucking shaking and I still couldn't look away. It was as if someone was holding my head there. Finally my sister came to speak to me and I was able to look away. I was shaking so bad my sister thought I was having a heart attack. I couldn't speak or do anything. I started sleeping in my sister's room after that. We moved shortly after. And the worst thing I'm feeling so creeped out typing this, getting a dread feeling, almost as if I'm gonna turn my head and see Palpatine sitting at the corner of my room or something.
Yeah, ignoring the role-playing bundle of twigs, Osfag from Adelaide reporting in. Call it whatever you want, but I'm gonna call it a skinwalker because that's how we've come to know it. Anyway, my mates and Elle are a bunch of dickheads who get a kick out of scaring people. We're pretty familiar with the surrounding area, in particular Mount Barker where we drive up to whenever we can. It's great there because a lot of people go camping there, and quite often they go out on some of the trails to explore and look for paranormal things at night. So this was a few months back. I brought a voice recorder with me, a good quality one, and we decided to pretend the skinwalkers were after whoever went up the trail we were hiding around. We brought an icebox full of PBJ sandwiches and beer to keep us company, and eventually we split up. One of my mates went a lot further ahead and hid, while the other was a little closer to where Elle was. The general idea was that once the group passed me, I'd record something that was said, and when they reached the furthest guy, he'd make some creepy noises and move the bushes to scare them into going back, whereupon my mate would shake the bushes in front of him, leading them to believe the skinwalker caught up to them. We waited for 2 hours and our patience paid off. A group of 5, 2 girls and 3 guys were heading up the trail. Turned the recorder on, one of the girls ended up saying, "This place sure is creepy, let's go back." Brilliant. I turned the playback volume way down and messed around to get the recording to start at those exact words, not really paying much attention for a few moments. Until I heard the screams of the girls. I turned to look and noticed they were noping the fuck away, especially when my other friend also made noises in the bush. They all absolutely shat themselves when I played the recording pretty loudly, and soon enough we were all sitting around chugging beers and laughing at those bundles of twigs. Anyway, Friend who was way up ahead mentioned that they'd flipped their shit before he even started shaking the bushes and trying to scare them, which we thought just meant they were really scared to begin with, nothing much. One friend was a little disturbed by that, saying that there was a funny smell further up the trail, but I just told him to stop being a pussy. As we kept drinking, we couldn't help but notice there really was a smell in there. It was sorta rusty and dirty smelling. Almost like battery acid in a way. Our jimmies were rustled, so we started looking around us, and that's when we fucking saw it. It was 8-9 feet tall, pale gray-ish but dirtier gray and almost black in other areas, and was standing hunched forward just about 100 or so yards away. Its arms were fucking long, and were twitching. We started to get up and make to leave, when it stood up a lot straighter and to this noise. It sounded like the scream of a fox, but just spookier. Probably because of what it fucking was. It doesn't seem to care about us and slinks away into the shadows quite slowly, but we still nope the fuck out of there. As we're heading back, we hear the same cry behind us, and then, just noises and small gurgling sounds, weaker and shorter versions of that cry. It just kept making more and more sense, until it started saying, "Mati, Pusa Aiy." The description of it being like a dog or a cat trying to speak is very accurate. Either way, it didn't follow us, and the next day we found the group of people we'd scared getting their shit together to leave. Turns out what scared them wasn't my mate but the pale figure that they'd seen pretty much right behind him. He's stopped trekking and going outdoors in general because of it.
I swear to God I never believed in any of you guys here until I started reading these stories and suddenly made some connections. I swear to God this is all true. I live in Pennsylvania just outside the city of Reading. There's a lot of thick forests around here but nothing ridiculous, and it's mostly suburbs where I am. Farther out it's highways and farmland. Lucky for me I live right up at the edge of a small community at the very top of a hill. The forest is literally across the street from me. Anyway, somewhere around a year or two ago my dad and I were outside having a personal chat about some recent tough events going on in my house when suddenly we heard a weird sound in the forest across the road. We both stopped and looked over. "I didn't think deer came out this late," I think I said. My dad just stared and looked kinda confused. Then suddenly we heard someone yell something like, "Help, I'm bleeding." We both sat there staring into the woods where it came from. My dad stood up and said to get inside. We both rushed in and I watched him run upstairs to grab his handgun. My dad's a rough sorta guy and always heads for his gun if he thinks something's going down. Something was definitely fucking going down. I opened the back door again to our deck, it was a glass door, and peeked back out towards the forest to see if anyone would come sprinting out or something. Keep in mind we're at the edge of the suburbs and not exactly used to hearing people scream bloody murder in the middle of the night. Then I heard it. This loud, weird screech. It was like a cat or a woman but it definitely wasn't human. It was weird, like it was high-pitched but not, and filled the entire neighborhood for a full 10 seconds before it suddenly went silent. I slammed the glass door shut and ran to the stairs just in time to see my dad stomping down in boots with his pistol. "Did you hear that?" I remember asking him. He just nodded and we both head out the front. By now a bunch of our neighbors were coming outside too. The scream was really fucking loud but I didn't even expect all these people to come out this late. It was almost midnight. My dad went down to the street and looked up at the forest. Another guy came up to my dad and he had some kinda handgun too. I watched them start chatting for a bit until suddenly another one of those screams pierced the air again. It was horrible and made me feel sick to my stomach. It went on for something like another 10 seconds and just suddenly cut off. Like fucking idiots my dad and this random neighbor guy decide to point their guns towards the forest and head in. I couldn't believe it. I mean my dad is a hunter and he's been doing it since he was a kid. He's almost 40, but I'd be damned if I'd do something like that. They must have been in the forest for a good 20 minutes together searching the darkness for God knows what. I sat outside with a bunch of neighbors that entire time, staring into the forest and waiting. Eventually they came back just fine. They stuck together the entire time according to my dad and thought they saw something like a tall guy in the forest at some point. When they tried to see if he was the one screaming, apparently he got on all fours and hauled ass into the forest. We all were pretty shaken up but parted ways and head back to our houses. That was pretty fucking weird and no police or anything ever checked it out, but eventually we all moved past it. A long while after that there was a separate incident that I didn't exactly connect to the first. Later that year I was sitting outside with my friend on my back porch. We were talking and having a grand old time dicking around when I saw my cat Jinx pawing at my glass window. "What a stupid cat," my friend said. I agreed with him and played with the cat, putting my finger on the window while he pawed at my finger wherever it went. That's not what's weird though. Later that night I was in my room playing a game with my window open. My cat was somewhere in the house along with all our dogs, so I know he was fine. It's important to note that my neighborhood has a real problem with stray cats though. Anyway, I was sitting there playing some games with my window open when I heard what sounded like a cat meowing outside. I paused my game, wondering if Jinx had gotten outside, and went to my window to listen. I heard that meow again, but it was a long, deep one, that kind you hear from a cat when they're pissed and backed in a corner with their claws out. I recognized it wasn't my cat, but it was still coming from the woods behind my house, so I stared into them and tried to see where the stray was at and what it was getting so pissy at. The cat did that deep, long, angry meow again and sounded sorta close to my actual yard. I heard some shuffling in the woods and then something weird happened. I thought I could hear someone talking. Except it wasn't like a normal person's voice. It was like some mentally unstable person trying to mimic someone else really badly. It was something like "Shtuayupad art." Immediately I got creeped out, but, seeing as how my window was on the second floor, I felt fairly safe to keep listening. Then I realized the voice was changing. "Shtuapid caat." It clicked. It sounded like something trying to sound like my friend but doing really, really badly. Then there was a serious scuffle. I heard twigs breaking and the cat just going apeshit. I mean, it was really screeching and meowing like it was fighting for life or death. Then there was this loud thumping sound. It was like something big and heavy smacking against something else solid. After that the meowing stopped completely and whatever was out there went dead silent. I was pretty creeped out by this point and I shut my window and had real trouble sleeping that night. Nothing's really happened since, aside from one incident where I was getting a drink late one night and thought I saw someone crouching really super low on my back porch and looking into my glass door. Like I saw light reflect off their eyes, like when you see an animal at night or something. The door was locked and it really freaked me right the fuck out and made me sprint to my room and wake up my dad, but he didn't find anyone or anything, and I've been assuming it was just me being scared from all these stories on /x/. Now that I've read all these stories, I'm freaking the fuck out. I've never seen one about something even remotely close to these things happening around my area, but now I'm freaking the fuck out. That shit was literally in my backyard. But yeah, that's all I got.
Be junkie. There's this heroin, coke dealer who has his little crew and always throwing cash around, doing dumb shit. One day over there buying my shit for the day. Announce they're all going camping. They love to do impulsive random shit. Beg to go with. I love camping, especially with crazy, cool people such as these folks. Leave Minneapolis to the wilderness outside Duluth. Group of 7 people, setting up camp, disorganized as fuck. One couple already fucking in their tent, lol, with all the chaos and getting high. Events weren't clear until later. 2 dudes go to get firewood and make sure nobody else is around to see us using needles and call cops. Nobody really takes note, cares to remember. They leave. 30 minutes later one guy comes back. Where's the other one? I went for wood. He went to make sure we were safe to get high. Whatever, he's probably just nodding off somewhere. 2 goddamn hours later, other guy strolls into camp, looking very not high. Where were you? Oh. Looking at birds. Lol, what the fuck? What junkie likes bird watching? Nighttime comes around. Dude who came back later acting strange. seems generally confused by our weird activities, looks almost pissed confused, sits down on a log by fire suddenly, awkwardly, like he's really drunk. Hard junkies don't drink, junkies be acting strange always. Whatever, been almost 9 hours since we arrived, people getting dope sick. Withdrawal. Time to get stoned. Dope is passed around, everyone desperately starts cooking up. Between cooking and strapping up I notice the guy just smelling the chunk of dope. Looking like he can't handle the smell. WTF again, everyone's done shooting up. The guy is still sniffing the chunk, by now everyone notices. He cautiously licks the dope, has incredibly strong taste and smell of uber vinegar. Makes this horrible, animal gagging, hacking sound, fuck. The main dealer guy offers to cook and prepare shot for him. He was already high and didn't notice strange behavior too much. The guy mumbles, Maya, shoots him up. Note, your average junkie does enough dope in one shot to kill King Kong and his whole family. Tolerance is a bitch. Guy's whole body starts to shake. His eyes are popping out. Everyone's still staring with dopey glazed eyes. He makes this strange panicked choking breathing sound, like there's really wet towel in his mouth, throat. Blood literally pops out of his nose, incredibly dark colored, starts to make intense high-pitched screeching scream noise, stopping to choke, cough suddenly every second or two. These are not normal OD symptoms. Horrible, horrible stench permeates the camp. Holy shit, falls over backwards. Panic ensues. Dude, you gave him too much fuck. Main guy goes to help him up. Can't. Stench increases to the point where the rest of us are gagging and or puking. Hear very distant scream from forest. Amid the panic I think nobody else notices. Hear other screams, screeching join in, everywhere. What the fuck? The panic levels cannot be contained. Junkies screaming inside the camp too. Screeching outside camp grows and grows. Ears are ringing. Stench is clogging my lungs. Can't take it. Overwhelming smell and high-pitched ringing too much to handle. Blackout. Awake in morning. Look around. Very shaky. Can smell hints of stench from last night. Nobody to be seen. Except that fucking guy. The goddamn guy. Boots sticking up from the log he fell off of. Walk over slowly. Looks like he's been dead weeks. Skin is tight over his face. White and blue. Eyes sunken. Looks like he lost 80 pounds before dying. Blood covering him. IDK from where? Realize I am covered in blood too. There are scrapes and dent holes all over the ground. Some obviously animal tracks, human footprints, handprints, and combinations of all. Some seem to be dragged. Withdrawing and losing my mind. Steal the main dealer's car, go home, and never speak of it again. Never heard a word from or about any of those people ever again. Except for one girl, who got put in a psych ward I heard. Never visited her.
Well, I guess since this is becoming more of a spooky camping story thread, I'll post mine. Since it's kind of long, I'm not going to greentext. I was in the Boy Scouts until about 6th grade, and the summer before I quit I went to a summer camp in a muggy Florida marsh savanna area. If you've ever been to Florida in the summer, you know it gets ridiculously hot and humid and rainy, so the summer camp was a complete disaster weather-wise. But me and a few of my friends didn't like it for a very different reason. Now each camp had a colossal pavilion in the center surrounded by assorted palmettos and tents. These tents were a frame-style permanent tents atop rotting pallets, which made the whole camp look like an abandoned military base. These frames were made of disgusting 20-plus-year-old tarps that insulated really well. This was a fucking nightmare in South Florida because moisture plus heat would stay in each tent and make each night a living hell for its residents. Add mosquitoes the size of your ballsack and the entire campout was a disaster. Our scoutmaster was a giant douche, so he made us earn a minimum of 10 merit badges that week, so that meant we had to attend 10 classes to earn them. These classes took place in screen pavilions around the main mess hall at the center of the giant campground, with some of the bigger merit badges, whittling, archery, next to the mess hall, and the smaller, less important ones, birdwatching, electricity, were only accessed by a single dirt trail and a 10-minute walk. I'm a pretty natural leader, so I led one of those inner circle kind of clubs within my troop, called the Blind Koalas or some other stupid name, so we could have a koala bear with glasses and a cane flying over our camp like the little jokesters we were. I convinced my fellow koalas to take 10 super easy merit badges so we could get done early, and we snuck our Game Boy Advances into camp so we could go hang out in the woods and play our new Pokemon games. Ruby and Sapphire had just come out. My friends were all for it, so we did just that. We snuck out really fucking far into the woods outside the camp, off the regular path, and into the savannah. We made it out at about 3 o'clock, but before we started to play our game where no one could find us, we saw a really run-down house. When I say house, I don't mean a cabin, or even a concrete block where the rangers live. I mean full-on chimney and porch suburban home just plopped in the middle of the fucking woods like a bad Photoshop, with no roads leading up to it. This place would have looked perfect had it not looked like Father Time took a dump on it. It was kind of blocked by some pine trees, so we didn't see it coming out. We went up to the window on its porch and peeked inside. Boxes piled above eye level filled the entire house. No furniture or anything, just boxes of what appeared to be magazines, newspapers, and other printed material. The only other thing besides those boxes was a broken wheelbarrow leaning against a window on the opposite side. We were about to open the door to go inside, no matter how scared we were, because we wanted to check out those boxes. Then the most blood-curdling noise ever came from the house. The only way I could describe it is like someone twanging the piano wire from the inside of the piano, so it came out twang 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 twang. It was so unnatural and unnerving we booked it the hell out of there and ran to the mess hall. Apparently we had been gone for 2 hours, but it felt like 5 minutes. The sun hadn't even changed in the sky. They kept saying it was 5:30, but the sun was barely where it would be at 3. It didn't go down until 8 that night for some reason. It got so much worse though. When it got dark that night, it got really fucking dark. At 8 the sun just barely disappeared over the horizon. At 9 you wouldn't have remembered what the sun looked like. We kept fire going and trying to calm our nerves after that house we found yelled at us. Eventually we had enough Slim Jims and ghost stories and we went to our grotty ass of frames. I was kind of fat back then, so I was eaten alive by mosquitoes every night, and I had placed a mosquito net over my cot to save me from their wretched onslaught. It did minimal amounts of protecting and acted as more of a shitty curtain. I tried going to sleep, but it was just so fucking hot in the A-frame I had to remove everything but my boxer briefs to stay cool. About 2 in the morning I think I hear a loud thonk from the next tent over. I jolt upright and tangle myself in my net and scramble on the rotting pallet to free myself. I fall through and fall into the conveniently placed ant pile underneath the pallet. I manage to save myself before I get eaten, but I was so groggy and so much adrenaline through my bloodstream I barely knew what was going on before I heard another loud thunk a foot away. The A-frame collapsed on top of me and my bunkmate and we crawled out from underneath. I looked next door to the other A-frames and watched them fall like dominoes, each with a sickening thonk as the pillars holding them up fell down. I could barely make out a tall figure in red and white dart from behind one of the tents to another, but I couldn't tell. It was too early in the morning to make a positive ID. It was chaos. My whole troop had collapsed to frames, and the entire pillar to erect the fucking thing was broken. The piece to slide into the pallet has snapped clean off. Now these A-frames were old, but it's still pretty difficult to break a 4-inch by 4-inch block of wood in 2 with one swipe. I ran out in my boxer briefs to make sure everyone was okay. And we told our douche scoutmaster someone had knocked down every A-frame in the camp. We marched down to the camp ranger and told him, and he said he'll go out and help us find the guy who did it. About an hour later the camp director drives up in a jeep with some short fat kid in a black ninja outfit in the back. He tells us the kid confessed to knocking them over and it's a mystery solved. Everyone came forth and called bullshit, mostly because the agreed upon profile for our suspect was a tall, probably 6 feet 5 inches or so lean guy in red and white. The ranger waved it off as some kind of joke and said he had a confession and he was going to get everything sorted out by morning. We tried finding the house again the next day and couldn't find it. I was about to just shrug and say fuck it when my friend who was in the first A-frame to get knocked over came up to me at dinner on the last night. He was kind of nervous to talk to me and hasn't really been himself, and he told me he smelled something really fucking shitty before he woke up that morning. He looked up and saw the figure staring at him, and he thought it was the weirdest fucking thing. It was a person, it wasn't a spooky skeleton or anything, but the guy was really fucking tall, with lanky ass arms and smelled like straight up death and shit, so much he said he could see stink lines coming off of him. He said the guy was obviously quite old and gray, but the weirdest thing was that he was wrapped up in bandages and a headdress, like a fucking mummy. A mummy, in South Florida. I laughed it off and just told him it was just some asshole fucking with us. He just sighed and continued to eat his gloop. The weirdest shit didn't start until we came home from camp. There were 10 people who had their tents knocked over, excluding me and my bunkmate, and out of those 10, 8 of them had burglars clean their place out while at camp. Only me and the kid who thought he saw a mummy were spared. His house burned down a month later, the fire department saying someone had thrown incendiary devices into the windows at night while they were sleeping, even though there was no broken glass or open windows. I guess the pattern here had to do with houses. Nothing has really happened to my house. I moved a couple months after dropping scouts, and the last I heard my old house was still there. I honestly have no idea what the fuck any of it means, but it's creepy as shit to think about. No one I know from that troop is still in it. They dropped it around the same time as I did. I heard we all dropped a ton of weight too. None of us are fat anymore, and I've been told I look too skinny now. Did we drop scouts for the same reason? Maybe. I have no idea what to expect from it or this story, and I know it's shitty as fuck to end a story like that, but the only other creepy thing is that I find ants in my stuff all the time and it's annoying as hell. I like to think it has something to do with this, but in reality it's probably another shitty thing to deal with in life. I get bit a lot still, though, and I have to cover myself with band-aids so I won't itch them all the time.
But wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. Isaiah 34:14. The forest hushed. Leaves fell like thunderclaps, and among the brush Sergius slowly lowered himself to the ground. The birds trusted him, but they had no love for men, and their silence let him know to hide. His mother had warned him, "Trust not the men for they hate what you are." Morning sun kaleidoscoped off fresh dewdrops and projected a pattern of light across his frame as he slipped through the underbrush. He was propelled by human hands, a gift from his mother, and inhuman legs, a curse from someone else. Sergius reached an outcropping above an overgrown path. Like much of the forest, it had been abandoned by the humans when they declared the area forbidden. He crept to the edge and leaned over to inspect the human who had invaded his forest, a young girl. She was dressed in a white blouse and blue skirt that fluttered in the breeze as she stumbled down the path among the falling leaves. Her hair was pulled back and covered by a blue kerchief. Her steps were slow and uncertain. Sergius allowed himself a moment to relax. He had seldom seen humans, and never this close since his mother had died when he was young. A victim of the cruel winter. He didn't know why he should fear this one. His curiosity burned, and the desire to know more drove him forward. Sergius crept slowly along the small outcropping that flanked the path, never taking his eyes off the girl, still unaware of his presence. The girl stopped and crouched down, forcing Sergius to halt. He possessed exceptionally keen ears, and tilted his head to each side listening closely. She was quietly weeping. The girl wrapped her arms around her legs and buried her head between them. Her sobbing increased. His fear lifted, and was replaced by pity. Pity for the fragile thing crying alone in the woods. Sergius emerged slowly. He was aware of his appearance, and didn't want to frighten the girl. Sergius lowered his head and held his arms out, his palms open. As he came closer he could see the dried stains of blood drops on her blouse. "Do you need assistance?" said Sergius in a calm, soft voice. The girl looked up at Sergius, and wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. Her mouth dropped open as she swallowed the sight of the half-man, half-monster. Her gaze met his feet first, which had been replaced with 2 cloven hooves. Then her eyes followed up his legs, which bent backwards abnormally, to his waist, which gave way from hair to flesh that was lean and muscled. Wide-eyed she continued to his nose, which was broad and flat like an animal, then to his eyes, which were a pale green, and entirely human, to his horns which spiraled out from either side of his head, then up and over the satyr as she fell backwards, unconscious. Sergius stood up straight, baffled. He looked around, and could see no one. He could hear his mother's warnings in his head, and how he should take special care to avoid humans. But looking down he couldn't help but feel empathy for the girl. How she was like him, wounded and alone, lost in the woods. So he lifted her up and took her with him. The girl ran her fingers through the hair on his chest and clung tightly as she started to awaken. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked weakly. "Certainly not," said Sergius. Sergius could see yellow-black bruises on the girl's face. The swelling was enough to force one eye nearly closed, and her tear-soaked cheeks glimmered in the sunlight. "What's your name?" said the girl. "My mother named me Sergius," he replied. "I'm Prudence. They say you're a monster, that you eat children." "I don't eat children," Sergius paused, "but I am a monster." "Indeed you are," replied Prudence. "You live here? In the woods?" "I live in the woods." "Yes," said Sergius. "Not these woods, but one slightly over a bit." "Is that where you're taking me?" "Yes, to my home. You can rest there and I have food and fresh water, and if you feel fit I'll escort you back to the edge of the forest. Prudence was lulled back to sleep in Sergius's arms by the rhythm of his long strides through the forest. When Prudence awoke she was lying on a bed of clovers beside a small lake. She leaned forward and with her eyes closed, her face turned and followed the aroma of cooking fish to a small stone cottage covered in moss where smoke piped from a chimney. Sergius emerged moments later from the humble dwelling with fish and steamed vegetables on a stone plate. "It's good to see you've awoken. I have food here. If you're hungry." Prudence accepted the plate and devoured it while maintaining her poise and manners as best she could. She looked up, embarrassed that she had eaten the food so quickly, but Sergius only smiled. He was glad to have some company, and more than happy to entertain a guest. "How long were you walking through the woods?" asked Sergius. "I don't know," she mumbled, still chewing her last mouthful of food, "since early last night, so for more than half a day," replied Prudence. "You need to be careful. You were nearly to the deep wood, and it's not safe there." "Not safe?" inquired Prudence, swallowing the last of her food. "Even for you? My heritage is less than pure, but there are some who would give in to the wild within them. If there was any humanity in the midst, gone now, replaced with a savage darkness. I don't mingle with the wild ones who live beyond my forest, in the deep wood." "You speak so well for a man who lives in the woods. My mother smuggled me here when I was very young," he said, resting against a tree beside her. "She was worried I would be killed for what I was. We made a home here, but she died several winters ago. I've been alone since. I'm so sorry. I lost my mother too." Sergius lowered his head and took the empty plate away from Prudence. "How did your injuries come about?" Prudence held a hand up to her bruised eye, and rubbed it as if she had forgotten. My father has a temper." Sergius frowned and looked away, fearing that he had been too forward. "It will be dark soon. Would you like me to escort you back to the edge of the woods?" Prudence nodded and they began walking quietly through the woods, following paths created by the migrations of local fauna. After the food and rest, Prudence's strength had recovered enough to make the journey home. "Will you be safe?" asked Sergius, motioning a hand to her bruises. Prudence took his hand in her own too and smiled. "Yes, I think I will be. But, would it be alright if I visited?" Sergius looked shocked. He didn't expect her to want to visit him again, a creature like him. Misunderstanding his surprise and fumbling her words, Prudence revised her request. "I mean, if it's all right with you, and just sometimes. If I need to get away." Prudence flung her arms around him and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. Sergius smiled, widening his already broad bestial nose. "Of course, m'lady." Prudence curtsied, and continued off into the field. She was still a few hours from her home that lied through beyond the mountains in the distance, and Sergius didn't want to leave her alone for the trek, but he dared not leave the safety of the forest. Prudence returned several days later and brought Sergius a book entitled The Pilgrim's Progress from This World to That Which Is to Come. Sergius liked a character named Ignorance and reminded him of his own lack of understanding of the world around him. Prudence also brought seeds to help him expand his small garden. He could read a bit, and was more than happy to let Prudence help him learn more. She would sit near the edge of the water and read to him sometimes, and he would close his eyes and imagine the cities and town that existed in her stories. His mind would wander, and he would dream of what it was like to be human. She asked him about the deep wood more than once, but he always managed to avoid answering her. He often thought of the shadowy region beyond his home where the trees were thick and light was shunned. It was a place that always made him worry, not because it frightened him, but because it excited him, a part of him at least. The sanctuary of his meadow was all he had to retain his humanity, and the wild part of his nature beckoned him to give in to the wild of the deep wood. He was strong enough to resist it, he hoped. From then on she visited him once a week, sometimes twice. As the seasons changed, so did her outfits to match the weather, but there was also a bit of levity to her wardrobe. Her clothing became more and more daring as she visited Sergius. His freedom from worldly problems excited her, and she desperately wanted to escape from hers, and to live in the wild with him. But she worried about her sisters, and how they would fare without her, and in the end always returned to her village. The topic of her father only came up once. She told Sergius that her father was the judge of a Puritan hamlet on the other side of the mountains. He was cruel, and when she could she would take the brunt of his anger to keep her sisters safe. Sergius never mentioned it again, he could tell it upset her. Sergius waited for her at their usual place at the usual time, but she didn't appear. Weeks passed and he watched the leaves turn from green to shades of yellow to orange and then red. He continued to make the short trek to the edge of the forest every few days anyway, in hopes she would arrive. It was halfway into autumn when Prudence finally appeared. She was wrapped in a thick wool scarf. Sergius was overjoyed to see her, and had in his hands the last book she had lent him, excited to discuss it with her. But he paused, and his eyes widened as the smile dripped from his face. Her face was bruised again. There was an uncertain gait to her steps which alarmed him that her injuries might be more severe. Her pace slowed, and she stumbled. Using his unnatural legs, Sergius bounded out from the cover of the trees into the field and caught the collapsing girl before she hit the ground. She was deathly cold and shivering. He lifted her in his arms and carried her back to his small stone cottage, taking special care not to re-injure her. "It's bad," said Prudence, wrapped in a blanket and holding a cup of hot tea prepared by Sergius. "My father knows I've been visiting you." Sergius listened to her story, but had trouble looking away from the deep black bruises that covered her face. She was bundled up tightly from the chill, but he could imagine the extent of it. "Father says I'm never to come back here," said Prudence. "I would stay here, with you, but I can't. I can't leave my sisters to him. If I'm not there, then I don't know what he would do to them." "I understand," said Sergius. It was half true. He understood responsibility, and dealing with the reality of the life you're given. He lived with it every day. "Take care, Prudence. If this is the last time I see you, then I hope you'll remember me." "I will," she said teary-eyed. "I love you." They hugged, and Sergius escorted her back to the clearing. As she walked away he tilted his head and watched her go. She was his first real friend, and maybe his last. He had always kept his hopes up, and tried to do good, but always had the nagging feeling that his life was unfair, that his life asked too much of him. But now he knew that there was a little girl who had more strength in her than he ever could. He would miss her. Sergius returned to the warmth of his cottage. He thought about Prudence, and her sisters, and her father, and her people for the rest of the day and into the night. How strange it must be to live among people. The forest was his home. His friends were the birds, and their song gave him comfort, but their singing was strangely absent. Prudence, he thought, she has returned. Sergius erupted from his home and sped to their meeting place, but where he expected to see Prudence he instead saw 5 strange men, each one armed with a long musket. "There it is. Fire!" shouted the front man. A lead storm of musket balls whistled by Sergius. With extraordinary speed he dodged the shrapnel, poised low to the ground, and pushed off with his hands and feet, sending him soaring into the posse of men. He landed hard on the man who had shouted, his collarbone snapping under the pressure. Springing back up, Sergius landed a hoofed foot into the face of another. Grabbing the next by the throat, Sergius lifted him up and slammed him into another. With primal vigor he continued on and lunged to the last man before he could finish reloading his weapon. The helpless man was pinned against the cold earth. With eyes like fire, Sergius leaned in. His horns sank down and framed the sides of the filthy yellow-toothed man's face. "Where is she?" said Sergius flatly. "The witch? We know she's been fucking the beasts in the woods, and now she's got a devil in her belly. She's got a date with the gallows, and then she'll be burned, a fitting end for what she is." Shock washed over Sergius, and the fire in his eyes extinguished. He had to save her. Leaving the injured men he raced towards the village. What had taken Prudence hours he could cover in minutes. The terrain was unfamiliar, but as he approached he could see smoke rising in the distance. It was a gaunt Puritan town. Smaller than what he expected, it had a small square where there was a collection of buildings surrounded by small cottages and farmland. Bounding over the heads of two armed guards just outside the town, Sergius landed on the edge of a fence, then pushed off hard and leapt onto the roof of a building. He crept along the edge and looked down on the townspeople. They were surrounding a wooden platform beside an enormous fire, a girl with a noose around her neck looking up at him. She smiled, then the stool was kicked out from under her and she dropped, snapping back and hanging limply from the rope. With one last enormous leap he soared above the heads of the gathered crowd surrounding the girl, and landed in the center of them with enough force to shake the ground beneath them. There were 100 people or more, watching him, speechless, with their eyes wide in their gaunt, grey faces. Sergius rose slowly in the center of the crowd, surveying them. They were thin, weak people. If they did indeed have anyone among them that posed a threat to him, he had already dispatched them in his woods. Then he saw her. She hung limply from a wooden tripod, silhouetted in front of the enormous bonfire behind her. He dashed through the people, and they instinctively moved from his way, until he came up beside her and lifted her up. With one pull on the rope he tore down the gallows. He held her in his arms and rubbed his hand on her cheek. She bore new injuries, and her skin was cold. She was dead. Holding the small, fragile thing in his arms, he stared up to the onlookers. They remained still, immobile from shock, or fear, or both. Only one dared look back, the judge. His black robes and pompous sneer betrayed him. Sergius locked eyes with him, and the portly man, realizing the danger he was in, turned around and fled. His short arms and legs flailed wildly as he ran up a hill to a large house. Sergius put his hand to Prudence's stomach. If there was ever humanity in his eyes, it expired at that moment. His fury absolute, he leapt into the air and covered the distance to the judge in 2 long strides. The judge in a panic slammed the thick oaken door behind him for some respite from the furious beast. The door shattered into splinters and Sergius emerged, still drunk with anger, and lifted the heavy judge by the throat. Using his momentum he carried the judge across the room, knocking away bookshelves and tables, and pinned him against the back wall. Sergius's fingers squeezing tightly around his throat, his feet dangling uselessly a foot above the floor, and let loose a savage cry. But the familiar sounds of a girl quietly weeping forced Sergius to calm, and he looked over. There were 3 young girls there, huddled together. They were scared of Sergius, and weeping over the loss of their sister, but what they feared most was the reprisal of their father. What he would do to those innocent children. Sergius leaned in close to the judge, and I had always thought that I was the monster. They would finally be safe. It was his gift to Prudence. Turning around he dragged the judge out of his home and into the town square. "Help me! Kill him, he's a devil! Kill him!" cried the judge, but not a single person from the crowd moved to help. Sergius's grip tightened on the judge as he was viciously dragged through the muck in front of the terrified villagers. "Fine, I confess. I did it, I did it. Have mercy on me. The child was mine," shouted the judge. The townspeople stirred. The revelation came as less of a shock that they would have wanted to admit to themselves. They realized their own involvement in the murder of an innocent girl. Their faces solemn, they looked down, and one by one they moved out of the way to allow Sergius and his captive to pass. The judge continued crying for help long after they had left the town, but Sergius ignored him. His clothes were torn and filthy by the time they reached the woods, and still he cried for mercy from the beast man, but it fell on deaf ears. Sergius dragged him back to his glen and then deeper, to where the darker, wilder things lived. Tearing the tattered jacket off of the judge, Sergius bound him to a tree. He leaned down one last time and looked the judge in the eyes. "If I ever lose my humanity, something that I treasure above all else, it will not be because of you." Sergius turned around, the sight of the judge repulsive to him, and left him there for the dark things. "She should have never loved you more than me. She cried out when I strung her up. She cried out for you." Without looking back, Sergius, in a flat, emotionless voice responded. "I came when she called for me. No one will come for you. Then the dark things took him.
Well then, my grandmother told me this story when I was younger, and it only solidified by an experience years later. My grandmother was living in Mexico at the time, in a small village pretty far from the main towns. This was many years ago, before things were more modern and these villages depended on home remedies and mysticism. My grandfather had work all around Mexico and in the states building railroads, in fact alto of the railroads on the west coast, he made with his crew. Anyway, my grandfather messed around with some girls in the States and in the other villages in Mexico. Well, one of the girls in the other villages was a supposed witch, or lechuza. I'll let you guys look that one up. My grandma found out because when she went to trade her corn in a neighboring village, she was confronted by the mistress, and the mistress swore that she would have her husband. It was a regular night in her village and my grandfather had gotten home from the States. She awoke to the sound of an owl outside of her window. She described the owl screech as that, but also with a pig squeal and a dog bark. She swore at it and did her superstitious sayings, and she swears that the owl flew down and morphed into a tall, pale, lanky creature, much like the ones described in the pastas, and ran away from her home. She then proceeded to tell me that it's been following her all her life, but she keeps it at bay. Here's where my experience, although it may have been a dream, starts. Be like 10, staying at grandma's, cause Mexican grandmas are the best, go to bed, wake up to noise in the kitchen, see grandma staring out of a huge bay window at the back lot that had my dead uncle's house, see her staring at something, on the roof is this twisted pale figure, staring back, the figure twists backwards and does this slither-like crawl backwards off of the other side of the roof, nope the fuck back to bed, ask my grandma about it the next day, she flips shit and says it was a dream and to never talk about it again, or it will come after me, or some other superstitious shit, never think about it until I read my first Skinwalker story years ago. To this day if anyone in the family asks my grandpa about it, he gets fucking furious. Either way, that's my contribution.
Alright, this happened to me a few days ago, but it unnerved me so much that I haven't given it much thought until now, and I was immediately struck by the resemblance my encounter has with the Skinwalker stories I've read here on X. So I figured I may as well type this shit up and see what you guys have to say about it. First and foremost, I'd like to note that I'm an introverted 23-year-old living in Ohio who's bordering on becoming a shut-in, but I have this one friend from high school who, much to her credit, hasn't given up on me yet. She's dating this guy who got her into vintage cars, and she's going through this big rockabilly phase which I don't personally care for, which is why I declined her previous invitations to attend local car shows. But this past Saturday I gave in. I'll call her E for anonymity's sake, and her boyfriend shall be J now. I was a little nervous getting a ride out there with them because I didn't want to get left behind for one reason or another, but I also didn't want to take my own car for fear of getting lost out in the rural parts of Ohio. It's easy to lose track of a specific vehicle in a crowd, and I'm terrible with directions, so I figured the best option was to climb in the back of Jay's old remodeled truck. We drove for what seemed like hours and, just as I'd suspected, we ended up in what was basically the middle of nowhere. The car show was being held on a large expanse of field that was only really accessible through a thin stretch of road that looked like it was more suited for tractors than old racing cars. As we pulled up and I took in the layout of this exhibition, I was none too impressed, but I couldn't tell that. Plus, for better or worse, I was stuck there until they were ready to go, so I had to either make the best of it or be miserable for the whole day. Skipping to the meat of the story. I'll just say that I got bored of the seemingly endless rows of cars pretty fast, and as dusk approached I was hopeful that we would soon be leaving, but my hopes were thoroughly crushed when an impromptu bonfire was assembled. Feeling exhausted at this point and wishing that I hadn't come, I took a seat on a picnic table that was situated on this block of concrete a bit away from where all the vintage cars were parked. I was bored out of my mind as I listened to the men drunkenly talk about parts and tools, as if they hadn't done enough of that in the daylight, and by chance I happened to catch some guy staring at me through the crowd. I remember being a little unnerved by the intensity of his gaze, but I brushed it off thinking he was either going to cause trouble or he was high on shrooms. Either way, I diverted my attention elsewhere and I sort of forgot about the guy as I thought about what I could have been doing at home on the computer in that moment. Minutes passed when I felt someone slide onto the bench beside me and I offhandedly glanced over, expecting whoever it was to be oblivious to my presence much like everyone else at this little shindig. But much to my surprise the person was staring at me dead on. I jumped and reared back, more than ready to berate him for scaring the crap out of me when it clicked in my head. This was the guy who'd been staring at me from the other side of the crowd, and just like before, he was staring so hard at me that it freaked me right the fuck out. Being who I am though, I tried to play it off. I smiled and said something like, "Hey, how's it going?" He didn't respond, only continued to stare at me, and the longer I looked at him the more I realized that something was off. Despite how intensely his eyes were locked on me, the muscles in his face seemed slack. His jaw wasn't really sitting right in his mouth, and his arms were limply sprawled across his lap like he'd just let them fall as they may when he sat down next to me and hadn't bothered to readjust them. I was really unnerved by this point, and just when I was about to excuse myself, he did something I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. Without anything else changing in his facial expression, his lips started to curl upwards. It was a slow process, and I could actually see the muscles tensing and straining in his cheeks as his lips gradually moved higher and higher until, I now realize with startling clarity, he was giving me the exact same smile I'd given him not too long ago. But it didn't stop there. They kept moving further up until I could see his gums and his lips were stretched thin and white. It was only then that I smelled it, some horrible stench like a dead dog that had crawled up straight out of hell. I didn't even bother with pleasantries as I quickly stood up and moved away from him. At the time, I thought maybe he was just some whacked-out loser, but looking back on it, I see all kinds of similarities with what I've heard concerning skinwalkers. It's probably a really good thing that this thought didn't cross my mind at the time, because otherwise I don't think I could have handled what happened next. So, I went looking for my friend and her boyfriend through the crowd, intent on telling them that we had to leave and I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I finally found her and I tell her what happened. Of course she tries to say it was probably some guy who was just tripping out, and if I stay with her and Jay I should be fine. I told her that wasn't going to work for me and that I really needed to leave. I could tell that they were really disappointed, but much to my relief they gave in. They bid their farewells, though it was far from fast enough for me, and we walked across the dark field to his truck. We get in and start driving away. I actually thought I was home free in that moment, but as it turns out I seem to have really bad luck. Just as we go to pull out onto that thin road, something stumbles into the headlights. Sure, I was ready to start screaming my lungs off in the blink of an eye, but I calmed down when I saw it was a woman, until that is she lifted her head, looked straight through the windshield at me, and her lips started to slowly curl upwards. I was ready to have a panic attack at this point as I gripped the back of E's seat and I told Jay to just drive. Despite the panic that was no doubt in my voice, he didn't understand and said that he was just going to see if she was alright. He rolled down the window and stuck his head out, asking her if she was okay. Her head bobbed up and down sort of like a bobblehead's, but she didn't say anything. She was still smiling, and I watched in terror as Jay exchanged a look with E before leaning out the window again and asking her if she wanted a ride back into town, name omitted for anonymity's sake, and she nodded the same as before, almost like most of the tendons in her neck were cut or something. I'm sure you can imagine at this point the horror racing through my veins, though I didn't understand it at the time, and then double that as you think about watching this strange person slowly walk around to the driver's side passenger door, pull the creaky door open and weakly climb in to sit next to you on the backseat. Yeah, I was ready to piss my pants. I'm actually surprised I didn't throw up from how scared I was. Well, we started driving again and I pushed myself as far into the corner as I could without ever taking my eye off her, but much to my surprise she never even looked at me. She spent the entire ride looking down at her lap, and I was seriously starting to question how long we were going to keep her in the car with us, seeing as she hadn't specified where she needed to be dropped off at. But as we were passing a house on a back road right near the city limits, she suddenly spoke. Just one word, here, but it wasn't the English language as we know it, it was more like a croak that sounded like the word, here, and it turned my blood to pure ice. Jay was confused but did pull over to let her out. Ever the gentleman, he asked if she was really okay being let out here, and she climbed out. Turned to look at him in the driver's window and nodded like a damn bobblehead again. Jay and E bid their farewells, and it was only for a split second, but I swear I saw her lips start to curl upwards again, and then she spun around and seamlessly disappeared into the darkness. The two lovebirds up front agreed that the situation seemed a bit strange, and I didn't even try to tell them the truth. Mainly because I don't know what the truth was. After I was dropped off at home, I turned on every light in the house before locking myself in my room, which is how I've been sleeping since then. The entire thing just really scared the crap out of me, and now that I'm seeing the Skinwalker connections, I'm even more unnerved by the memory. I haven't seen either of those people since that night, but I've only really left the house for work because I'm still really paranoid about the whole thing. Was it drugs? A coincidence? I honestly don't think I want to know.